No one intervened.
Hello, you lovely listener. I'm charmed as always to have you as my guest today. I hope you've made yourself comfortable and are ready to join me on this audio adventure. Speaking of getting comfortable, perhaps you've noticed my new logo for this podcast. It is the image of a wingback chair covered in a delicious plaid pattern. It is complemented with a stack of books next to it on the floor. This design has been a labor of love and one of the most fantastic pieces of collaboration I've ever been privileged to be part of. My friend Emily Clarke is a trained and clearly talented artist. I asked her if she would be interested in using her skills to create a logo for this podcast, and she was so very gracious and agreed to my request. We've had several delightful days full of conversation, laughter, sending images, and sharing ideas back and forth that have resulted in the best logo any lady has ever asked for. We laughed pretty heartily when she pointed out that we spent longer on the design of the chair, just the chair, than I did in making my first episode. And I could not be more pleased with the results. Emily, thank you from the bottom of my heart. You are a magical friend, and I am so lucky to have connected with you, especially at an age when many of us stop making new friends. Just to be clear, that age comment is about me and not her, by the way. She is still young enough to be hip, while I'm old and stodgy. Now it is time for our reoccurring segment. And now, in other news. My choice morsel for you this episode is about an obituary. Yes, an unusual choice, I understand, and not a resource I thought I would be using, but this was too humorous to pass on. If you haven't heard or seen this yet, oh, you are in for a treat, my friend. This obituary first appeared in the Fayetteville Observer and was written by the deceased son, Andy Corrin of New York. I'm going to read an edited version of the obit, though even with the edits, it is a bit long, but trust me, well worth the time. I will include a link in the description of the episode in case you want to read the whole thing. It is a hoot. A plus-size Jewish lady redneck died in El Paso on Saturday. Of itself, hardly news, or good news if you're the type that subscribes to the notion that anybody not named you dying in El Paso, Texas is good news. In which case, I've got news for you. The body-fertile, red-headed matriarch of a sprawling Jewish-Mexican redneck American family has kicked it. This was not good news to Renee Mandel Corrin's many surviving children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, many of whom she even knew and, in her own way, loved. There will be much mourning in the many glamorous locales she went bankrupt in. McKeesport, Pennsylvania, Renee's birthplace and where she first fell in love with ham and atheism. Fayetteville and Kill Devil Hills, North Carolina, where Renee's dreams, credit rating, and marriage are all buried. And of course, Miami, Florida, where Renee's parents, uncles, aunts, and eternal hopes of all Miami Dolphin fans everywhere are all buried pretty deep. Because she was my mother, the death of a Zaftig good time gal Renee Corrin at the impossible old age of 84 is newsworthy to me, and I treat it with the same respect and reverence she had for, well, nothing. A more disrespectful, trash-reading, talking and watching woman in North Carolina, Florida, or Texas was not to be found. Hers was an itinerant, much-lived life, a Yankee, Florida, liberal, Jewish, tough gal who bowled 'em in Japan, rolled 'em in North Carolina, and was a singularly unique parent. Often frustrated by the stifling conservative culture of the South, Renee turned her voracious mind to the home front, becoming a model stay-at-home parent, a supermom really, Just the perfect PTA lady, volunteer, amateur baker, and just kidding, y'all. Renee, Rosie to her friends. And this was a broad who never met a stranger, worked double shifts with Doreen, ate a ton of carbs with Bernie, and could occasionally be stirred to stew some stuffed cabbage for the kids. She played cards like a shark, bowled and played cribbage like a pro, and laughed with the boys until the wee hours, long after the last pin dropped. At one point in the 1980s, Renee was the 11th or 12th ranked woman in cribbage in America. And while that could be a lie, it sounds great in print. She also told us she came up with the name for Sunoco, and I choose to believe this too. Yes, Renee lied a lot. But on the plus side, Renee didn't cook, she didn't clean, and she was lousy with money too. Here's what Renee was great at: dyeing her red roots, weekly manicures, dirty jokes, pier fishing, rolling joints, and buying dirty magazines. She said she read them for the articles. But filthy free speech was really Renee's thing. Hers was a bawdy, rowdy life lived large, broke, and loud. We thought Renee could not be killed. God knows people tried, a lot. Renee has been toying with death for decades, but always beating it and running off in her silver Chevy Nova. COVID couldn't kill Renee. Neither could pneumonia twice, infections, blood clots, bad feet, breast cancer twice, 2 mastectomies, 2 recessions, multiple bankruptcies, marriage to a philandering sergeant major, divorce in the 70s, 6 kids, 1 cesarean, a few abortions from the quietly famous abortionist of Spring Lake, North Carolina, or an affair with Larry King in the 1960s. Renee was preceded in death by her ex-boyfriend Larry King. A talented and gregarious grifter, Renee M. Corin eked out her final years of luxury. She literally retired at 62, under the care, compassion, checking accounts, and evidently unlimited patience of her favorite son and daughter-in-law, Michael and Lourdes Corin, of world-famous cow sanctuary El Paso, Texas. Renee is also survived by her favorite son, the gay one who writes catty obituaries in his spare time, Andy Corin of obviously New York City. There will be a very disrespectful and totally non-denominational memorial on May 10th, 2022, most likely at a bowling alley in Fayetteville, North Carolina. The family requests absolutely zero privacy or propriety, none whatsoever, and in fact encourages you to spend some government money today on a one-armed bandit at the blackjack table or on a cheap cruise to find our inheritance. She spent it all, folks. She left me nothing but these lousy memories, which I and my family of 5 brothers and my sisters-in-laws, nephews, nieces, friends, neighbors, ex-boyfriends, Larry King's children, who I guess I might be one of, the total strangers who all, to a person loved and will cherish her forever. Please think of the brightly frocked, frivolous, funny, and smart Jewish redhead who is about to grift you, tell you a filthy joke, and for Larry King's sake, laugh. Bye, Mommy. We loved you to bits. Recently, a friend reached out to me. They were thinking of writing a book and wanted to pick my brain about starting such a project. Since in 2021, I completed my first novel. That inquiry gave me the inspiration to talk about my writing and the process of writing as today's topic. A little background as I begin. I was a weaver of stories even as a child. I think many of us start in this state. Like so many others, while having a passion to write, I took a different path. As I got older, I found myself getting farther and farther away from my writing. My creativity and storytelling took off in a direction I didn't think was possible when I became an educator. I found many ways to express myself and fulfill the need to share a tale that all writers have. I was telling stories of the past instead of making up my own. But the dream of writing a novel was always there deep down. When I hit my 40s, it was time to be more honest with myself. The fantasy I held of penning a book was going to remain that, a fantasy. I told myself that my chance of completing a book had passed me by. I needed to accept this. It wasn't all as glum as it sounds. Yet again, I'd found another outlet for my need to create and express. In my 30s and 40s, I had started writing murder mystery games. Maybe you've played one of these games. They come in a box. You and around 8 people gather for food, and each is given the role of a character who is suspected of killing the victim. Everyone gets a guest guide booklet full of information, and the group spends the next 2 hours spilling secrets, trying to divert suspicion onto other guests, and attempting to figure out who the killer really was. I've played many of these games, and delighted in creating several of my own. There was a great deal of planning and plotting required for these games or stories. I found the creation and the writing of the guidebooks and clues most rewarding. They were never something that was going to turn into a book, that secret dream, which I knew it was time to abandon. So, how did I go from digging a grave for my hopes and dreams to actually finally writing a novel? Simple. It wasn't supposed to be a novel. After taking a pause from any kind of writing for a few years, I had an itch to get back into the swing of things. Though I was kind of aware of my deficiencies as a writer, I thought I would start by going back to the basics and getting myself some basic writing exercises. I developed a very clear set of goals. I was to create a list of writing prompts, and then was going to sit down and work on a prompt about 3 times a week. I was hoping to get about 200 to 500 words out on paper every time I wrote. After working on one prompt for one day, my task would be complete, and I would move on to the next afterwards. I wasn't worried about completing anything. I needed to go back to the beginning, and I just wanted to play with words, find the joy of writing. I wanted to let my mind imagine characters, practice dialogue, improve my details, strengthen my ability to create a world or scene. The first day I sat down at my laptop, and Bob came into my head. This character trapped by his inability to leave his house. He was also filled by an ungrowing happiness that was caused by his stifled existence. I wrote about Bob and his turmoil. I was really satisfied with the amount I had written in my first go. When I finished for the day, his counterpart Ruth came into my head. She was a sarcastic, bitter, closed-off kind of woman. You know, all the doors are barred and the windows are locked. Ironically, though, she was Bob's connection to the outside world. Now, I was supposed to move on. My plans dictated I was to go on to the next prompt. And here it was, only the second day of my writing exercises, and I was already carelessly chucking my rules out the window with no regard. I decided my established goal really didn't matter as much as the desire to just write. If Ruth wanted to come out and inspire me to write, then I would follow her. I revisited this story the next day, and I just let the words flow, bringing Ruth, his housekeeper/assistant, to life. Next, I was inspired. I got the hook. Bob was going to have Ruth travel on his behalf and report back to him about her adventures. This would allow Bob to fulfill his need to connect to the outside while never addressing the actual fears that was keeping him inside. I was excited about this plot idea. I once again, the next day, sat down and wrote the next bit out. This went on for days, for probably a couple of weeks. I really expected to stop at some point. The ideas were going to stop flowing and it would end, and then I would move on to the next prompt. However, after a few weeks, it became clear this was turning into a real story. So yet again, I made a new goal for myself. What are we on? Like goal number 3? Since I'd left high school, most of my stories had a start, sometimes a middle, but rarely an ending. I could never complete these things. I set a target to finish this tale. I didn't know how long that was going to be. Maybe 50 pages, maybe more, maybe less. I didn't know. It was going to take as long as it took, and that's all I needed to know. I was also experimenting with a new style of writing. There are two basic schools of writing, the chaos or the command style. In the command system, you plot and plan everything out. You know your characters inside and out. You know exactly what is going to happen to them and where the story is going. Writers who use this style spend a lot of time creating storyboards and character backstories and doing research. Oh, a lot of research. This is often weeks or months of planning before the writing really starts. Once they have completed all their planning, then they sit down and write their tale, and it usually goes somewhat quickly. It also requires less editing because they have often fixed many of the flow problems in the plotting stage beforehand with all of that research. I had always seen myself as a command writer, but for the first time, I was just going with the flow, totally letting the writing carry me where it wanted to go. I was in complete chaos. It scared me to death, but at the same time, I was never more excited. I felt like I was walking on a wire over a canyon and there was no safety harness. To me, it felt like one of the most reckless things I'd ever done in my life. The sense of complete freedom was intoxicating. The story and characters were always surprising me. It was almost as if I was reading it as the words hit the page. There were so many cases of stunning myself with a twist or a development. Even though I was the writer, you'd think I would know it all. I didn't. It was such an electrifying experience. It was when the story hit about 80 pages that I knew for sure that this was now going to be a novel. My first novel. My dream. I had only planned to play on the shore, and now I found myself hip deep in the water, and I was trying to learn how to swim as the waves came crashing around me. But I think for me, that was the secret. If I had started with the idea that I was going to write a novel, I never would have started. I never would have gotten beyond a first sentence or maybe even a first paragraph. I would have been too scared. It would have stopped. But I was just playing around and having fun and experimenting and just letting things flow. And it's what allowed me to write. It was only after months of using the chaos method that I totally bought in. Hey, I'm a chaos writer. Following this system is the only way I finished that book and I'm ever going to finish a book. Command is too stiff for me. Now, I am not dismissing or saying it is a bad system. For others, it offers security. It is a framework, and it is what they need to complete their tale. And I used it for my murder mysteries, and it was comforting, and I never would have gotten my games done without it. It was required. But in order for me to write a novel, it was too constricting. And I kept running away from it, and I never would finish. I find it really bizarre that it wasn't until my mid-40s that I found out this very fundamental part of my identity as a writer. I just never allowed myself the liberty to experiment and explore my creative needs like that. After having this epiphany, things did not run smoothly. I want to make that really clear in case your mind went there. It's not like I just sat down and the rest magically tumbled out of my fingers and the book appeared with no problems because now I knew I was a chaos writer. No. I had so many stumbling blocks on the journey. And I was learning on the fly how to fix these things. There was so much trial and error, and I am still in the trial and error phase. I do have some tips for those of you who write for how I kept going and finally managed to finish the rough draft. And just so you know, I'm done with that rough draft, and right now I am on the Uber editing phase. So it's not done. But I think that kind of advice is best saved for another episode. Do you have an experience of learning something about yourself that was a surprise? That when you were sure about some fact or part of you, and then suddenly either you changed and it's no longer true, or maybe like myself, you were just mistaken the whole time, and that you had your own epiphany and misunderstanding about who you were and kind of felt like a stranger to yourself for a moment? I would love to hear about them. Be good to know I'm not the only one who's kind of had this moment. If you had them and want to share them, please go over to my Facebook page, Jacqui Lents author Facebook page. I will put a link to that page in the description of the podcast. Thank you, as always, for joining me in this chat. I wish you well, and take care.